Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And at the CPAC conference a couple of days ago, Steve Bannon performed a fascist salute after calling for America to abandon democracy and make Trump president for life. This caused a far-right political leader from France, who was due to speak at the event, pull out. Yet Nigel Farage not only continued his schedule at the conference, but also went to a party hosted by Steve Bannon. Is Farage playing with fire here, given not just British public opinion to MAGA right now, but how it might turn even more against it over time? But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So as I've said before, and I'll say again, MAGA represents a difficult political problem for Farage and Reform UK. They're behaving as if it's purely of benefit to them. But the fault lines are already appearing. Farage may imagine he's riding the crest of a far-right wave. Take Germany, for example, going to the polls, facing the same sort of pro-Putin, fascist disinformation, digital campaigning that has hit other European countries' elections recently. Back at the start of 2022, before Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the three-day special operation that has lasted 3 years and counting, the AfD were just going from about 5th to 4th place in the polls. Now their polling has doubled and they're comfortably in 2nd place. Unless there's a concerted effort for German voters to prove the polls wrong and take action against the far right, there are going to be more headlines of the rise of the right in Europe again. Reform UK are themselves ahead in the polls in the UK, though that is more fleeting, as I've said before, a consequence of the Conservatives having no idea how to make themselves relevant, and a Labour Party who are not getting their messages out to the public, who are not seeing any changes with the new government yet. But that will change, even with the media continuing to distract, and if Labour get no better at comms, the changes are already coming. The major obstacles are Trump's trade war ambitions and Putin's imperial ambitions. But, there are ways to tackle both birds with one stone if Europe can act with a bit of urgency. But Farage seems to me to be acting a little bit recklessly. He does have a genuinely tricky balancing act. He already had before Trump won the presidency. Reform UK, after the summer riots, had to explicitly disown the Tommy Robinson Brigade. He's presumably working on the assumption that Reform UK is still the only show in town at the ballot box for Robinson supporters who want to vote. Despite putting some noses out of joint, they will still back him and he gets to appear different to more moderate voters. MAGA's a bit different. Farage cannot disown Trump or his project. Such is the tricky position he's in. He even got caught out on GB News earlier this week. He had to effectively disown Trump's comments about Zelensky being a dictator, because no way a British political leader can get away without doing so and expect to remain doing well in the polls. But he tried to have his cake and eat it by saying Ukraine should set out a timetable for elections. So in other words, contradicting himself. Saying, oh no, Zelensky's not a dictator, but why aren't there elections? GB News' Tom Harwood, of course, made the point that we didn't have elections in the UK for 10 years because of the Second World War. Farage tried to claim that we actually did hold elections during the Second World War because we held elections while we were still at war with Japan. It's like a pathetic response. Japan was not attempting to invade Britain, was it? A war thousands of miles away does not stop you holding elections. Ukraine has war within its own borders. But if this response, the sort of debating point you might expect from a thick kid who was given a choice between joining the debating society or Morris dancing, if that's the best Farage can do, it shows how difficult things might get for him over the next few years. Zelensky, very popular in the UK, way more popular than any British political leader, although often people do think better of decent foreign political leaders than their own. But Trump is deeply unpopular. 73% have an unfavourable view of him in the UK to only 22% who approve. Putin is 89% unfavourable to just 4% favourable. But what's especially tricky for Farage is that a high proportion of Reform UK voters are the ones who do have a favourable view of Trump. So Farage does get some support from supporting Trump. But the votes he won last year netted him 5 MPs. He needs to substantially improve this haul at the next election. Otherwise, his project will be less the French Revolution and more Wagner's March on Moscow, which fizzled out after no time at all. Farage is where he is in the polls now, not just because people are not satisfied with either the Conservatives or Labour, because you might think, well, why aren't they just going to the Lib Dems or the Greens? And some are. But a lot of them have obviously flocked to Reform UK because, aided by the media, he is claiming he has a credible chance to form a government to smash the status quo. And now that he's ahead in the polls, that, is easier to sell to people. But even if he gets 50 MPs at the next election, which seems a stretch at this point, who is going to believe that's the sort of progress which puts him on a trajectory to form a government? He'd have to be the oldest Prime Minister in British history by some margin at that rate. In fact, never mind winning enough MPs to form a government. If at the next election, the Conservatives win way more seats than his party next time, and then they decide to get a decent leader again, Reform UK could just collapse like UKIP did. People just aren't thinking in terms of how things are going to change over the next few years. They're looking at polling as it is now, understanding nothing of the context and somehow imagining it'll carry on like that for another 4 years, despite the changes we know are going to happen. The dividing lines between Europe, which includes the UK, and MAGA America are already appearing in public. Yes, it would make no strategic sense for Farage to suddenly turn on Trump. That'd be mad. But some of the peripheral stuff is baffling. Steve Bannon, who is a MAGA leader, but he's not part of Trump's inner circle anymore, as far as I can tell, performs a very obvious fascist salute at a conference. A French far-right politician pulls out because they realise this would be a very bad look back home. And France is more credibly in danger of having a far-right government in the next few years than Britain. But even they don't feel they're in a strong enough position to be accused of associating with actual Nazis. Yet Farage not only still goes to the conference, but is one of the VIP guests at a purely social event, a party held by Bannon afterwards. Granted, not really being spotlighted by the mainstream media, maybe that was part of Farage's calculation. I had to read about it in the Murdoch New York Times, but he still attended. Bannon was still the host, and all of this is documented and can be brought up by either Labour or, if they decide they'd like to actually win some support, even the Conservatives at any time between now and the next general election. Farage just isn't behaving as if he has a difficult balancing act to perform. I'm seeing no caution there. If he's still going to be in a good polling position in 2 or 3 years' time, he needs to be preparing for several contingencies. Yes, he hopes that the pincer movement that America and Russia are carrying out in Europe causes further economic decline, with Labour blamed and Farage profiting. But he also needs to prepare for the very feasible outcome of Labour's reforms bearing enough fruit for voters to give them their full decade of renewal, and Trump's behaviour becoming even more unpopular amongst the voters Farage is trying to win over in order to have a stronger presence in Parliament after the next election. If Reform UK are not on at least roughly the same number of MPs as the Conservatives after the next election, where do they go from there? How do they realistically claim that they've overtaken the Tories? They cannot win more MPs by just appealing to the narrow range of voters who are spread all over the country with our first past the post system. They need to actually effectively abandon some voters in areas where they've got no chance and broaden their appeal in the areas they have a realistic chance of winning. And he's going to struggle to do that if he's not just tying himself to Trump, who is already unpopular here, but he sort of, in a way, has to. He should just do it more carefully. But also people who aren't even that close to Trump anymore, but are becoming more openly fascist by the day. We already know that Farage melts when asked tough questions. So why is he inviting people to ask why he goes to Nazi parties? It just seems reckless for someone who is supposed to be a smart political operator. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.